Have you ever told yourself, tomorrow I'll fix everything? Tomorrow I'll wake up early. Tomorrow I'll stop wasting time. Tomorrow I'll finally become the person I know I can be. And for a moment, it feels real. You imagine your future self waking up disciplined, focused, in control. You picture a completely different life, better habits, more confidence, less stress. But then tomorrow comes, and somehow nothing really changes. You still wake up late, you still scroll your phone, you still feel that quiet frustration in the background of your mind. And the strange part is, it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you don't want to improve. It's because your brain is quietly working against you in a way most people never notice. Here's the truth that almost nobody tells you about self-improvement. The harder you try to change everything at once, the more likely you are to change nothing at all. And that's where most people get stuck. They think real change has to be intense, dramatic, extreme. They believe they need a perfect routine, a perfect plan, a perfect version of themselves. But the human brain doesn't work like that. In fact, it works in the exact opposite way. Let's break this down. Imagine your brain as something that is always trying to save energy. Not because it's lazy, but because it's designed to keep you safe. Anything new feels uncertain. Anything uncertain feels risky. And anything risky, your brain tries to avoid. So when you suddenly decide to wake up at 5 a.m., go to the gym, eat clean, read daily, meditate, and completely transform your life overnight, your brain doesn't see growth, it sees danger. And what does it do? It resists, it creates excuses, it makes you feel tired, it convinces you to delay. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is trying to protect you from change. And this is exactly why most self-improvement routines fail. They are too big, too fast, too overwhelming. So what actually works? What if the real secret to changing your life is not doing more, but doing something so small, so easy, that your brain doesn't even resist it? This is where the easiest self-improvement routine comes in. And it starts with something almost too simple to take seriously: a 1-minute rule. Not a 1-hour routine, not a complicated system, just 1 minute. Here's how it works. You pick one habit you want to build. Just one. Not 10 things, not your entire life. Just one small action, and you commit to doing it for only 1 minute a day. That's it. If you want to start reading, read 1 page. If you want to start working out, do 1 push-up. If you want to start journaling, write 1 sentence. If you want to meditate, sit still for 1 minute. At first, this might sound pointless. You might think, how is this going to change anything? But this is where the psychology becomes powerful. Because you're not trying to build a result, you're building an identity. And your brain responds very differently to identity than it does to pressure. When you force yourself to do something big, your brain resists. But when you do something small and easy, your brain accepts it. And once it accepts it, something interesting happens. Consistency begins. Let's say you decide to do 1 push-up every day. On day 1, it feels almost silly. On day 2, it's easy. On day 3, you might feel like doing more. But even if you don't, you still did something. And that's the key. Because your brain starts collecting evidence. I am someone who shows up. I am someone who follows through. I am someone who keeps promises to myself. And that identity slowly begins to replace the old one, the identity of procrastination, the identity of inconsistency, the identity of I'll start tomorrow. Most people try to change their life by chasing motivation. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. Some days you feel unstoppable. Other days you feel nothing. So if your entire life depends on motivation, your progress will always be unstable. But identity is different. Once you see yourself as a certain kind of person, your behavior naturally follows. A person who sees themselves as a reader reads. A person who sees themselves as disciplined takes action. A person who sees themselves as consistent shows up even when they don't feel like it. And that identity is built through small, repeated actions, not big, dramatic changes. Small proof, again and again. This is why the 1-minute rule works so well. It removes resistance, it removes pressure, and it replaces perfection with consistency. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because this routine doesn't just change your habits, it changes how your brain makes decisions. Let's say you start with 1 minute of studying. At first, you stop after 1 minute, but over time, something shifts. You're already sitting there, you've already started, and starting is the hardest part, so you continue. Not because you forced yourself, but because it feels natural. And that's the hidden power of this routine. It tricks your brain into starting, and once you start, momentum takes over. This is something psychologists often observe in human behavior. We struggle more with starting than with continuing. The resistance is strongest at the beginning, but once you cross that invisible line, everything becomes easier. That's why people delay tasks for hours, but once they begin, they often keep going. And the 1-minute rule is designed to break that initial resistance. It's not about the 1 minute. It's about what happens after. Now imagine this effect, multiplied over weeks. You start with 1 minute. Then some days it becomes 5, then 10, then maybe 30. Without pressure, without forcing yourself. Just natural growth. And slowly, your life begins to shift. Not in a dramatic, overnight transformation, but in a quiet, almost invisible way. And those are the changes that actually last, because they are built on something stable. Not motivation, not emotion, but behavior. There's another important psychological idea here that most people miss, and it's this. Your brain doesn't measure progress the way you think it does. It doesn't reward intensity. It rewards consistency. If you go to the gym for 3 hours one day and then quit for a week, your brain doesn't register that as progress. It registers it as inconsistency. But if you do something small every single day, your brain starts forming a pattern, and patterns become habits, and habits become your life. That's why this routine feels almost too easy, because we've been conditioned to believe that hard equals effective. But in reality, simple and repeatable is what actually works. Now think about your own life. Think about all the times you tried to change everything at once. New routine, new goals, new mindset. And for a few days, you were fully committed. But then something happened. You missed a day, then another. And slowly, everything collapsed. Not because you failed, but because the system was too heavy to carry. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of trying to fix everything, you focus on one small action, so small that it feels impossible to fail, and you do it every single day, no matter what, even on your worst days, especially on your worst days, because those are the days that define your identity. Anyone can take action when they feel motivated, but real change happens when you show up without motivation, when you act even when you don't feel like it. And the 1-minute rule makes that possible because it removes the emotional barrier. It makes action feel easy. And when action feels easy, consistency becomes natural. Over time, something deeper begins to change. You start trusting yourself. You stop making promises you can't keep. You stop relying on tomorrow. And you start building something real. A quiet confidence, not loud, not dramatic, but stable. And that kind of confidence changes everything. It changes how you see yourself.
It changes how you make decisions. It changes what you believe is possible for your life. Because once you realize that you can change one small thing, you realize that you can change anything, just not all at once. And that's the lesson most people never learn. They keep waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect mindset, the perfect version of themselves. But that version is built, not found. And it's built through small actions repeated over time. So if you're waiting for motivation, you might be waiting forever. But if you start with something small, something simple, something almost effortless, you can begin today. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because the easiest self-improvement routine isn't about doing more. It's about doing something consistently, even if it feels insignificant. Because those small actions, they don't stay small. They grow, they compound, and over time, they quietly change your life. So here's something to think about. What is one small action, so easy that you can do it right now? Not later, right now. Because that 1 minute might be the moment everything starts to change.